You are listening to the Practicing the Art of Small Business podcast with Shannyn Merlo and Julie Parker. Enjoy this conversation about business, leadership, and the self-awareness journey to great success.
Welcome, listeners. Welcome, Julie, to Practicing the Art of Small Business. Julie, we're on episode 46.
46.
Yes,
And how are you today, Shannyn? I'm fine, by the way. How are you? Yeah, I don't know if you asked me how I was, but I'm fine.
I
well,
did.
You know what FINE stands for? Frustrated, insecure, neurotic, and emotional.
Sounds more like me than you, let's be honest.
I'm good.
What does good stand for?
Great, overwhelmingly over the top. Dandy.
There you go, dandy. Again, we're showing our age. Not again, but you know, we've opened really showing our age with the use of the word dandy, but I'm going to run with it.
The young kids out there going, dandy, is that an app?
Is that a dance? And that's something that the 70-year-olds is like, yes, the dandy was a dance.
Oh, dandy, now I know exactly how she feels. What's our topic today? I know that we left off last episode with the promise of a topic.
Well, thank you for asking, and thank you for reminding me about what we promised our audience, because as a result of setting the promise, we are actually talking about the thing that we said we were going to do in episode 45. And what that is we're talking about boundaries.
Boundaries. Sounds very structured.
Yeah, well, it's like a fence. It's like a it's like an electric fence. It's like a border.
It's a containment.
It's a containment. Yeah. So we're talking about boundaries, and I don't know if I said this in the last podcast. I probably should have re-listened back to it. But the reason why we're talking boundaries is, I don't know about others, but I had a therapist. It's not Shannyn's therapy session, but I had a therapist say to me once, Shannyn, you need to set better boundaries. And I was like, what's a boundary? What's a boundary? What? About what?
Do I draw that in the room, on the ground? Do I draw that? What do I do?
Is that an electric fence? How does this relate to, you know, my issues with clients and whatnot?
The hula hoop I wear about myself so people can't get too close.
Exactly. But I think even if we do know what a boundary is, quite often, especially for service-based business owners, I think when people start their businesses, there's a bit of a people-pleasing side of people a lot. They have to say yes to everything and they have to do what people ask them to do. And so what can happen is boundaries don't get set. And then there's a whole bunch of things that happen from there. So I thought that we could talk about, you know, what boundaries are, why we should set them, how to do that. And
I think it's a terrific idea, because I think, curiously, many people have trouble setting boundaries as an adult. Even though they have had worlds of experience of them being set when they were children, because isn't that the first series of boundaries that we learn?
I guess suppose that was me.
So you don't, like when you're a toddler, you don't leave the house without mummy or daddy, and you don't go patting other, you know, stray dogs. You don't swear. You know, your parents are always kind of tweaking your behaviours and establishing the boundaries, which within, if you act and behave within those boundaries, everything's safe and good. Act outside of those boundaries, then there's some form of chaos that may happen.
I wonder whether the reason why as adults we're not as good about setting boundaries is because most of our experience is being told what our boundaries should be, and yet we're not taught as we transition past being a toddler. We're not taught around, you know, how do you set boundaries? And I suppose I don't want to get into this bit of the conversation, but I think schools are talking a lot about this around, you know, consent a lot more. That is a very clear boundary of saying what is acceptable. How do you set a boundary around, you know, body autonomy and things like that? So just in terms of, I don't want to go down that path, but in terms of a boundaries, we need to be taught what is a boundary and how do you set a boundary, because we might have learnt it by osmosis, but I suppose it would be kind of weird at my age to be like, can't go out of the house without mummy and daddy. That'd be weird. That'd be slightly awkward, and I definitely have more things to talk about in therapy.
And I think, asking that question of, well, what is a boundary when your therapist spoke to you about that? What is a boundary? I think what you said just before was absolutely golden. It is letting another person know what you find acceptable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good me.
Good you. Like in a podcast.
Snappity snap. Yeah, I think talking about what is acceptable, what's not acceptable, and making that clear. Why do you think that we should set boundaries in our professional lives, Julie?
So many reasons. The first one that comes leaping into my brain when you asked that question was it reduces frustration.
Yes.
Because people are always, saying the wrong thing or emailing me at the wrong time or, behaving in that way that they should know by now that I don't like, and I'm always frustrated. So I think it reduces down the frustration when you have great clarity around this is what I expect.
And we'll come back to that reduces frustration when we talk about how we set boundaries, because if this is a new topic for you, looking at where you're frustrated, what your hot buttons are, can be a really good place to start to think about where to set a boundary. So if there's something that's causing you distress, frustration, anger, that's where it's important to set a boundary, because there's obviously a stepping over, there's a boundary violation. Going on.
More dramatic. Yeah, you have violated my boundary. How dare you? So what's another good reason behind setting boundaries?
Well, I think that if we're living with a high level of frustration, that can lead to this sense of lack of control in our environments. And what that ultimately can lead to is burnout. And Julie, we did do a podcast, if you recall, on burnouts, and it is episode number 26. Are you suffering burnout or simply singed? And that's a good one.
I love how you said it's on burnouts, like we got in our cars and did burnouts.
100%. So I think that if we're frustrated and we are feeling like we're at the whim of others, which is, I think, what happens when someone violates our boundary, we're at the whim of how others are treating us, and we don't have a sense of control or autonomy around that. And if we have that over and over and over again, it can lead to this feeling of burnout.
Absolutely. I think that, that gaining of effective control is a huge one. I think another benefit is it allows others to understand how to behave in a way that is within what we talked about with that, that circle, that hula hoop of expectation around them. They're very clear about that. So they know how to behave when they're part of that particular team. So it's a safety element to it.
Yeah, and I think safety is when people know where they stand or where they're not allowed to stand because you're wearing hula hoop. What it does is it actually builds trust, because people then know that if I act in accordance with the boundaries that have been set out or the expectations that have been set out, then I know we're going to have a good experience with each other.
Yeah.
I also know that if I don't do that, that person's going to be potentially upset with me or angry with me, or our relationship is going to be affected. And so when you know what success looks like, it's easier to act in a way that is successful, which builds a lot of trust. An example of that would be one of my big hot buttons is being on time for meetings. And I am pretty good, I think, most of the time with telling someone if I'm going to be 1 minute late to a Zoom meeting, or if I'm going to be more than 5 minutes late to a face-to-face meeting, I'm letting people know. But I am there, and my clients know if you're 5 minutes late to a Zoom meeting, I am texting you. Hey, where are you? Have you got the link? What's going on? Because then it makes it very clear that actually my time is valuable and your time is valuable and and you're essentially paying for my time. So it's your dollar that you're missing out on. So turn up on time. Yeah. But it's very clear. Like every single client knows, like they get a 5-minute text morning, they get a 10-minute email, and I'm gone at 15 minutes past the hour. And that's a forfeited, you get charged a cancellation fee. But in saying that, I only set that boundary and made it very clear around a forfeit fee and a rebooking fee this year. So it's taken me 8 years of coaching to actually put a really solid boundary in place because it's such a frustration for me.
Yeah. And I think that kind of builds into one of my other ones that I've put in here as well. It avoids the compound. Oh, sounds like I was very upset by that.
Julie, would you like a hug? Are you okay, hon?
That's a really good point. It avoids the compounding effect of these issues because when we experience the frustration once or the disappointment once, it has a certain size and resonance to it. If it happens again, it gets a little bit bigger. If it happens the 10th time, it's pretty big matzo ball that you got to try to get past. And so as with all difficult conversations, the easiest time to have it is at the very start. If you wait for that compounding of the issue, it's going to become a far bigger deal.
Yeah, and this is particularly important when we're setting expectations for staff members. I see it more often than not that a lot of business owners won't manage a problem because they haven't defined the expectation from the start, and they feel really uncomfortable because they know that they've had this compounding effect. Now the problem is actually a really big problem, but they feel guilty because they know that they should have said something at the start, but they haven't said something at the start. So then it's become a bigger problem, and now they don't want to manage the issue. And when I'm saying this very much without any context, but performance management is one of these things where quite often I know I've gotten involved where more often than not, when I start a new client, there's a problem employee that we actually need to deal with. It's one of the factors of getting a coach in to provide support to actually make hiring decisions, work out what's going on, give confidence to move people on if they're not the right people. And you'll find that the need to performance manage someone has started years and years and years before, where there's been an issue and it was never managed effectively, and an expectation and a boundary was never reset, and the conversation had never been had. So this person has unwillingly continued a behaviour that is unacceptable, but they've never been told that it's unacceptable. Have you experienced
They're not really doing anything wrong. And I think we should circle back to this after we've gone through all of the great reasons why we should be setting boundaries, because I think that's right. You were mentioning before they feel guilty for not addressing it before. That wasn't a really well-worded sentence. They feel guilty for not addressing it before. And I think that ties into another thought of now I don't have the right to try to change things.
Yeah.
We'll circle back to that once we're figuring out how to reset boundaries. Another one I've written down here is that it just forms better relationships. And you know, if we like to, I do like to take it back to a family situation. Let's take it back to an intimate partner relationship. If you have got no boundaries in place and you're a couple and you've met, and that's where you feel like you're always in trouble or you're always making the other person in trouble, going, of course I wouldn't like that. What did you do that for? That's upsetting. And you have those sort of conflicts all the time after the honeymoon period's over, all the time. But if you spend those early phases of a relationship generally sharing, this is the kind of relationship I want to be in and the kind of interplay that goes on, and these are the things I'd find pretty unacceptable and deal breakers, and these are the things that I don't like so much but they're not a deal breaker, then everyone knows exactly who to be in that relationship. And so once they've opted in, I understand all of that and I'm in it. I'm here. Because all that sounds good to me too. then there's going to be far less conflict. And so that's the same with your team members, with a boss or superior and an employee. And clients and coaches and clients and service people, it forms a better relationship because everyone knows who to be in that relationship and you're both making each other happy.
Yeah, absolutely. So, the last thing, Julie, I'm stealing your idea because you said this in our...
I say very brilliant things. I don't blame you. Yeah.
All the brilliant things are yours, frankly.
Oh, don't say that.
In a business context, setting a boundary helps your business be more professional and responsive.
Yes. Oh, yes.
Oh, yes.
And that makes me think too, you're less inclined to go with the mood of the moment. I'm a bit tired, I'm frustrated today. So now, because you've already established all the boundaries around things. And so I think that's right. That level of professionalism is maintained when you say, this is how we all function together. And we don't go outside of that. And my last one I wanted to say was, because I do love the term creating the environment for success, it is just another thing that you can do to help create an environment for success.
Yeah, especially I think from a staff and client perspective, particularly from a staff perspective, by setting boundaries and expectations, then we are setting our team up for, like, here's what success looks like. Here's a boundary of what is acceptable and not acceptable behavior. So then they're either going to do the acceptable behavior, which is great, or if they don't do the acceptable behavior, you've set the boundary around that it's not acceptable, and therefore there's consequences around unacceptable behavior. So it does, again, it goes back to that building relationships, building trust, building success for your team, and reduces your frustration because you've set the expectation of what success looks like.
Yeah. Nice.
Yeah. Let's clarify. I think we've talked a little bit about it, but do you think you've got like a snazzy little definition of a boundary?
So I believe boundaries are thoughtfully chosen expectations to place on a situation between two people.
Ooh, I need to write
Or
that
two or
down.
more people, yeah.
Carefully chosen.
Yeah, considered.
Expectation.
Yeah, it's chosen.
I'm going to put this into the wrap.
Beautiful.
Expectations around?
Around the behaviour of two or more people. Because I think if you offended me in some way, maybe you said something quite gross.
I'm sorry.
And I said, what? Shannyn, you can't say that. Then that
I don't know if I take you seriously with the laughing.
Okay, I'm going to give you a better scenario. Actually,
Okay.
I'll give you a better scenario. So if I was running a business and I was a coach, and I am a coach, I go out to meetings and someone was running 10 minutes late to the meeting and I got upset with them for that, that's more reacting in the moment. And that's not always done from a thoughtful place. It could be done because I had another meeting backing up onto that. It may have ignored the fact that I myself am 5 minutes late to every meeting, which I'm not.
Never.
And so it's not well considered. However, if I think to myself, okay, people have run out late a few times, it really does throw things out a little bit. I'm going to establish a boundary around this. So what do I believe in my sane, non-over-emotional way, right, the space that I'm holding right now, what is a reasonable professional expectation that I have of another party and myself around meetings? And I come up with a solution that if you're going to be anything more than 5 minutes late, we're going to contact each other. If it's going to be more than 10 minutes late, that meeting is abandoned and either of us, the one that's turned up, is free to go and get on with their day. That is well considered. It's clear. It's communicated effectively. It needs to be communicated effectively as well. In essence, it's an agreement that this is the way we both agree to behave with one another. And that is an effective boundary. Because I think the ineffective boundaries are also there, but maybe they're more reactions in the moment. So not a clear boundary. It's just bumping up against each other.
And I'm going to say, for me, what a boundary is, and I like the term that you brought up was deal breaker. Because for me, because it's a relatively new thing for me, defining boundaries and actually saying this is my expectations. So that's probably like a middle range word, and a carefully chosen expectation is sort of a really soft word. But a deal breaker is very much a, here's the line of that I am not willing, like from a deal perspective, let's talk about a client. You talked about it in a relation context, but from a client perspective, what are my deal breakers? When will I say, you know what, we are no longer a match? And work back from there. So there's certain things, like I had a client who was stuffing me around, really. This person, they got charged more for cancellation fees than me actually doing work for them. And I made that very, very clear.
It's a whole new business model.
Do you know what? It's not a bad way to go. But, and I could have kept going because I was getting paid money for jam. But I was like, do you know what? This client does not respect me. And one of my deal breakers is poor respect for each other. And how that manifests is when there's poor communication around the boundaries of time and expectations of, when we have something in the diary, you are going to turn up and you're going to let me know if you can't turn up, just how I would do. My other things are that one of my it's not so much a boundary, but it's an expectation, is if a client has a problem with me, one of my deal breakers is, if you're not going to talk to me about that, then we have a real issue, because as a coach, I should be a safe ground for you to communicate. I am one of the safest people to be able to communicate a problem with, because my whole role is to create a safe environment for you to say, I'm not happy. If you can't do it with me, how are you going to do it with your clients or your staff members, or, a supplier that you need to have a different supplier that you need to have a difficult conversation with? So not so much a deal breaker, but one of my expectations is that we have a relationship that you come to me when there's a problem so that we can address that. It's part of the feedback. It's part of that idea of that, I can make mistakes. That's okay. I'm going to accept your feedback to me, but if you're not going to talk to me about that, then we're not a good match anymore, because we can't have this relationship without you communicating. So I'm probably not explaining this as well as what I would like to, but I think thinking about things around, from a staff member, what is a deal breaker? If they steal from the business, that might be an absolute deal breaker.
Great example.
Thank you.
Yeah.
If there's anything that is devious or dishonest, or if there's gossip, I have a personal vendetta about gossip. I actually think that there should be a zero tolerance policy on gossip in a workplace with team members, and that would be for me, it would be a deal breaker. If I heard someone was gossiping about another person, I would probably have a zero tolerance policy. Like, I'm that passionate about it, that if you hear something about someone else, that goes in one ear and then it doesn't even go out the other. It just disappears. That's one of the deal breakers.
The gossip one, that's a difficult one to have a range. What's acceptable gossip and what isn't? So you're better off, it's either acceptable or it ain't.
Yeah.
But still recognizing it's part of our human behavior. But and so putting all that structure behind it so everyone knows very clearly that there's zero tolerance. And so if it does happen, these are your choices of responses in the moment. If you're found to be doing it, there'll be 1 of 3 warnings, all those sort of things. Yeah. Nice. And so that's interesting too, because you can say that one of our agreements is to be professional with one another, but it does recognize how great clarity is required, because what's professional in my generation is quite different to what professional looks like in a younger generation. It's subjective. And so to break that down and say, this is what I mean, and I'm sure that you have this in your coaching contract as well, that this is the activity that's required of you. You know, you need to turn up to all the sessions and then take action on the to-do list and stuff like that. You need to have somebody who's that key accountable person that's going to really help drive this program, for example, if you're working with a team. And so some of these boundaries can absolutely be put into contracts, employment contracts and client contracts, and whether you're working in collaboration with another business, this is what contracts are, aren't they? Contracts are boundaries on paper, aren't they?
100%.
Yeah.
So I think in terms of setting boundaries, I've just written down MOU, and that's one of these things that it's a legal document, which is a memorandum of understanding. What that means is, yes, if we're going to do something together, what we do is we sit down and we go, what's acceptable? What is our understanding of your role, my role, your expectations, my expectations, so that it's a way of actually putting on the table, communicating and putting on the table, how are we going to work with each other? Now, that's obviously sort of more in a business partnership, but employment contracts and client contracts are a great starting point for setting boundaries. What I did, Julie, this year, when I realised that I had an expectation of people that I didn't communicate what my expectation was. And we said this right at the start, right? Like, by the time the bull's out of the gate because you've not put the fence in place, you're sort of chasing the bull. What do? You know, you've got to actually have a lot of effort to pull the bull back in and then shut the gate, right? So that's a nice analogy now.
I actually did picture you flailing about like a cartoon figure after a cartoon figure bull.
Yes. And, you know, I do like to remind our listeners that if you are only listening, that we do have these recordings on YouTube. And I did act out running up behind a livestock.
Which is why I can picture it so well.
It's worthwhile just for the face. So I think, going back to client stuff, I thought, we're professionals here. Professionals turn up on time. They turn up for their meetings. That's what professionals do. But I forgot that not everyone has the same expectations as what I have. And I've got a very legally drawn up by lawyers terms and conditions and all the rest of it. But actually my terms and conditions don't have the basic stuff around my expectations. So what I've done now, and I say to clients, this is not legally binding, but what I want to share with you is what's important for how we work with each other. You have the right to tell me what your expectations of me are going to be, but I'm sharing with you, here's my expectations of how I want you to show up in our coaching relationship. And I set down things like turning up on time, letting me know if you're not able to attend a session, that I'm not responsible for your results, that you've got to do the work, which I know to you and I, it probably sounds a little bit reasonable that we have to say that. But I think a lot of people say, well, you're my coach. What are you going to do for me? And it's like,
what magic spell are you going to cast?
Did I, in our previous podcast, did I talk about the cake analogy?
Yeah, that's a great analogy. Share it again.
Oh, really? Okay. Well, the cake analogy, and this is for anyone who...
It reminds me of my meat pie analogy for a slightly different area. So please continue.
We'll circle back around to that.
No, yeah, because it's nearly the same. So continue on. I love it. So continue on. This is a great analogy.
I suppose coaching is a little bit different to a lot of other service-based businesses, because if you hire a lawyer, you pretty much want your lawyer to write your terms and conditions. You're not gonna ask. Your lawyer's not going to coach you through what to say on your legally binding documents. But the cake analogy is, from a client perspective, what are you going to do for me? Well, I'm going to give you a recipe. You're going to tell me that you want to bake a cake. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a recipe for baking the cake. And I can also write you a shopping list to help you, get your ingredients. I can help you put time in your diary. I could probably not, because it kind of blurs the lines, but I could probably go to the supermarket with you if you really needed your hand held to be able to buy the ingredients. And then I'm going to give you the method. And again, I could put that in your diary so that there's time allocated, and I can support you emotionally. Like, are you ready? Today's cake baking day. You can do it. Come on, legend. Come on. Send me a picture of your cake at the end. But if you never crack an egg or mix up the batter or turn on the oven or put the cake in the oven, then there will be no cake. And therefore, you will not have achieved your goals, even though I've done everything within my power to help you bake a cake.
Yeah.
Because I'm not going to come in and bake the cake for you, because then I would be a baker, not a coach.
That's a good closing line on that one. I love it. So I use the analogy of a meat pie with delegation to help people understand the clarity with which they need to supply to somebody when they're delegating a task. And so I said to you, Shannyn, bake me a pie. And you go off and you bake me a pie and you bring back...
It'd be an apple pie.
Apple pie. You bring back...
No, because if you just told me to bake a pie, I would bake you an apple pie. I wouldn't.
And so you give me the apple pie and I go, no, it's for dinner, Shannyn. Meat pie. And you go, oh, man, you could have told me that at the start. So you go away and you come back and you bring me back a beautifully encrusted in pastry pie.
Chicken.
Shepherd's pie. I want shepherd's pie. You know, with the mashed potato on the top. It's delicious. You're like, crazy. This woman is a pain in the ass. And so you go off and you bake another pie. But this time you're so sick of it, you're running out of pastry. You baked a small little pie. It's just enough for dinner for one. I've got a whole family coming for dinner. I need a big family-sized meat pie. And you throw your arms up in the air, you slap me in the face, and you walk out of there.
No, I say, you know what? If my chicken pie and my single serving of shepherd's pie and my apple pie is not enough to feed your family, you can get stuffed. And then I storm out.
That's right.
Get stuffed on my pies.
Meanwhile, I'm eating each one of them. So when we are delegating something a task to somebody, if I was delegating a chef the task of baking me a pie, all I'd need to do is show him a picture of a shepherd's pie, family size, and say, can you make that for me? And that chef has got all the skills and experience and knowledge to be able to do that beautifully and meet my expectation, probably surpass it if they're a chef. However, if I was asking my 18-year-old child or yourself, can you bake me a shepherd's pie? I could give you the picture. It doesn't necessarily tell you as a non-chef who's never baked a shepherd's pie what ingredients there are. So I would have to give you the list of ingredients and, in all likelihood, the recipe as well as the picture. And now you can go ahead and bake me a pie. If you're 5 years old and you don't know how to measure ingredients and stuff, that's where I'm going to have to come in and guide you every step of the way as we move through the recipe together. And so I love that whole thing, because I love because when you said your analogy last time on the show, you said, and what if you decide to put sparkles on top of the cake? So, sprinkly, what are those lolly balls? If you want to put those on the cake, that's completely up to you because it's your cake. I love it. So I love it.
Plus, Shannyn sounds like she was very articulate with her analogy.
Drinking. But, it's interesting when you were talking about the deal breaker, because in a relationship, what's a deal breaker for some is not a deal breaker for others. Same with working relationships, client and professional relationship. And so how much do our boundaries come back to our own, or how much should they come back to our own values? These are contemplated boundaries we're putting in place to our own values. But what happens if those values are in conflict with the other person in that agreement? And I think that's where you're talking about, let's sit down and get a memorandum of understanding happening so we can figure out whether we're a good match or not.
Yeah, well, I might not be answering your question or responding to your statement well, but in terms of setting boundaries and looking at other people in the boundaries, where my head went, and this is one that happens quite a lot, especially for service-based business owners, is when do I start and end the day? When is it acceptable for me to not take a phone call from a client? And it all depends, again, but this depends on the expectations that you've set with your client and what sort of organization you're running here. So I'm sure I've told this story before. I upset a marketing employee at a client's site because I told them the story that I had been told by a marketing person, and that marketing person had said no one's died from a marketing emergency.
Funny thing to say.
Have I not told you this? So,
Cause of death, marketing emergency.
So, okay, let me tell the story. Yeah. If I've obviously not told it before. I had a marketing client, and we were talking about client expectations and stuff like that. And my client, who was a marketing person, said, "Let's be honest, no one's ever died from a marketing emergency. It can wait." Be careful who you say that to, because if they're an employee at your client's site, they don't really appreciate you suggesting that their role is not,
important enough.
Because we're not dying as a result of their existence.
There are so many more important things than you right now.
Might have triggered some issues there, but anyway. So for example, setting expectations with clients, there might be circumstances where, let's say you're running a very big ad campaign and it's set to go off at 10 p.m. and the client sees that there's a spelling mistake after they've signed off on all of the assets, but they've seen that there's a spelling mistake or the link's not working or something along those lines. So the ad spend is going to be not useful. Yes, that would be a reason why you would actually be contactable at 10 p.m. at night. But generally, if you're writing you're doing a website redo or a rebrand, your client does not need to be contacting you at 10 p.m. What happens if you don't set a boundary, like that they might contact you at 10 p.m. and you respond at 10 p.m., they then believe that that is acceptable behaviour. So at 10 p.m. on Friday and Saturday night, they are calling you to just discuss some of the new ideas that they've got for the rebranding, and then you as a service provider are like, hang on, I don't want them calling me at 10 p.m., but now I've set
you were the one that set the boundary. Because
exactly.
You answered it the first time without clarifying, I'm answering this one because it's actually urgent.
Correct.
Yeah, nice.
And so I think in terms of setting boundaries, it's definitely going back to those hot buttons. So for me, I am unavailable. Like, I actually say that it'll take me 36 hours to get back to you. So I'm responding straight away. And in fact, most of my clients, if they're calling me, I'm sending them custom text messages. Hi, I'm on a call. I'll get back to you in an hour. So I'm very clear around when I will get back to people. But if someone texts me at 9 p.m., just some sort of random thing, and they're a client, I actually won't respond to them at that time, because I don't want to set an expectation that at 9 p.m. that I'm free for you at 9 p.m. I'm not. And going back to boundaries around clashing boundaries or values, it's like, well, actually, if you're in a relationship, one of your values would probably be being with your partner and quality time with your partner. So setting a boundary so that you can have separation between work and life is really important, and it stops that burnout. I think setting boundaries, a big one is starting off is what is frustrating me, what's annoying me, what pisses me off, with clients, with with staff members, with, relationships? What are the things that I know are going to cause me distress when it happens?
Or even inefficiency in the business or non-productivity, because another clear boundary is pay your invoice within 30 days. Otherwise, action's going to be taken. So that's another boundary that you've put in place, because the business can't function when we don't have boundaries for certain systems or certain processes.
I think thinking about boundaries from a system perspective is really useful. And to think about, if my client doesn't pay within 30 days, then there's implications of that. And so then it can come back within your terms and conditions, and sitting down with the client, here's our rules of engagement, our terms of engagement. Here's how we're going to work with each other. I'm not going to deliver any work to you unless your invoice has been paid.
Yeah, that's
really,
right.
It's really simple.
That's right. And I think too, don't think that you have to have all of your boundaries in place. It's one of those evolving things, isn't it? Because the turning up late to meetings, that boundary that you've established wasn't necessary until people started routinely turning up late to meetings.
Exactly.
Because you can, just like systems, you can kind of put too many boundaries in place, and they're all listed in your terms and conditions, and people go, man, it's going to be hard dealing with this one. So you want to have a nice balance there too.
You mentioned at the start of our podcast about coming back to, how do you bring it back when a boundary has been violated but perhaps not communicated? How do you bring it back if you've realised that the ball has raced out of the gate and you've now got to pull it back?
Cartoon figurine, yeah. And I think it's just having that conversation. And so, you just draw a line in the sand and you say, okay, this is not working for me. This is why. And I'm going to get really clear in my own head about as you always say, what does success look like to me? And I'm going to bring my version of success to that conversation. And so Shannyn, if you were the one that was, acting in accordance to what I had been tolerating, because you get what you tolerate. That's what, that's another good saying around the boundaries, isn't it? And just say you were always terribly running late all the time. And at the time, I'm like, yeah, that's fine. And because it ends up working in my schedule. Oh, yeah, I'm running late anyway. Yeah, that's fine. And then one day I'm like, okay, that's it, line in the sand. I know I've let this get to this point. So it's about taking responsibility, and it's a 50-50 deal moving forward. I need to be very clear. I've got this opportunity now to be really clear with Shannyn about what I want, how I want things to be moving forward, and gain her agreement with that. Because Shannyn, like everybody, like me too, we don't just all bend at the will of other people. It needs to be working for us as well. And so to sit down and say, Shannyn, I need to have a conversation with you. I have allowed a situation to recur over and over again because I've never shared with you that it is actually something that interrupts the flow of my day. So I want to bring that one up to you. I'm claiming complete responsibility that I'm the one that's created that environment. And I was wondering, after I share what I see as a successful way moving forward, if it resonates strongly enough with you as well, because I'd love to get an agreement moving forward from here. I know I've always said that it's okay to run late. So therefore all our meetings do tend to run late. What I'd like to do in the future is to start running on time. And so whether that means that we select a better time, or if it's just me expressing how I feel, if that's enough, what are your thoughts about how well committed do you think we can both be in making sure that we're on time for our future meetings? Because usually we do have realistic expectations. And usually when we claim responsibility, for a start, we're coming in vulnerable. And I think it's important to come in vulnerable because our natural human response to someone who is expressing vulnerability is empathy. So we can use that very well to our advantage. I think it was Brené Brown in a discussion that I saw her talk about that, or it could have been somebody else. But so come in vulnerable, come in taking complete responsibility. And usually the other person is like, oh, yeah, of course, easy, totally get it. Totally get it. And then that's nice. Then it's nice and clean. If they say, no, it's just who I am. I actually run, you didn't create the environment for me. I'm late to every single thing I do. then that is a different conversation. In order for us to work together, I will need you to be on time. So should we change the days, the times, the mode of communication that we have, make it phone calls or Zooms instead of in person so it's less disruptive to the day when someone is running late? Can we work around this? If yes, great. If no, or if yes, we'll refine the boundary. And if no, this will be the parting of the ways. So I see absolutely nothing wrong with, because it's like all you said at the start with this other client, all you said at the start was that it was okay that one time that they were running late to that meeting. You didn't say it was okay 20 times. And by the 20th, you go, what do I do now? And so I think it's okay to say at the start, it wasn't a huge deal. It's kind of gone on for longer than I had anticipated. And so now I'm doing something about that. And I don't see anything wrong with doing that, having that conversation.
Julie, if this your program, the club, or the practice, what's your other
Dental
program?
Practice Management Program, 1-year online course. Very high value, lots of great curriculum. Yeah.
What's
and the club?
What would I need to Google, Julie, or put in my browser?
Dental Business Mastery.
dentalbusinessmastery.com.au. If those programs don't help you hit your wonderful goals, I think that you could be a conflict communication specialist, because the way that you communicated that, I don't know if you were seeing my face, but I was enamored with you.
I love it. I'm going to have to look back over the recording with more intensity.
Yeah, I don't think I looked away one bit, because your ability to not project your energy and to show authenticity, vulnerability, understanding, take responsibility, but actually get an outcome of what you want is just beautiful. We should do a whole, Julie, I've got this problem. How would you communicate this as an answer? Because it would be amazing. Anyway.
You're glorious. You're glorious. Oh, goodness gracious me. I don't know what to say. I'm a little embarrassed.
Because I'm far more direct. I'm like, right, here's the thing. This not turning up on time is wasting my time. I'm getting a little bit annoyed. Can you just, from now on,
could you just stop that and do this instead? What's that? I think there was a movie about office politics. It said, so if you could just do it all that way, just do it all my way, that'd be great. Thanks very much. What movie was that?
The Office.
Was it
the movie The Office? Because I actually was talking about that to someone today.
That's so funny. Can I throw in a curly one?
Sure. As long as they're short and curly.
When you were talking about, that's right.
It's inappropriate.
When you were talking about, I don't answer client phone calls at 9 o'clock at night. Totally acceptable. Totally acceptable. What if employees are the ones getting communicated with by their employers, and they're the person in the quotation marks, a space of lesser authority or power? How do they set a boundary? Can they set a boundary?
Yeah, so I think that this is a really, really good point, and it does go to client communications broadly in the business. What is acceptable? What's not acceptable? My belief is that as the business owner, you set the standard of what is acceptable and not acceptable. What that means is that you might choose to be emailing your clients at 9 o'clock at night because that's when you've had brain space to actually do client work. But what that's doing is telling the client that it's acceptable. The client will then respond at 9 o'clock at night, and then you're actually not getting work done. And if you're involving your team members, then you're actually saying that we work 9, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock at night. Now, if you're an international business, there might be an expectation around that. But also it's not a 24-hour. No one's ever going to have a 24-hour business unless they're on call. But the point is that you're setting an expectation of what's acceptable and not. And I've had clients of mine say, okay, yeah, but but it's the only time I've got to actually send these emails. So what do I do? Every email exchange program has the ability for you to time when to send your emails or turn your computer offline. An easier way to do it is to unhook your Wi-Fi, send all of your emails, especially in Outlook, it just sits in your outbox. Then when you rehook up in the morning, it then sends the emails out. And what that does is it basically just says that I'm not open for business 24/7. And from your staff member's perspective, you have a responsibility, and especially now there's actually director responsibilities coming in on mental health for team members, and maybe we should do an episode on that one day, Julie.
Great.
Where directors are going to be liable
Correct.
for the mental health of their team members. So if you are actually setting expectations that your clients can say that at 9 or 10 o'clock at night they need a response time, you're impacting the mental well-being of your team. And it's actually like, I'm kind of getting a little bit passionate about it because it's unfair. It's
taking
not right.
advantage of your position of authority that this person's going to just accept it because they're my employee. Yeah.
Correct. So I think that as leaders, we do have a responsibility to set good expectations, because it's not just about you and it's not just about what you'll accept. You're actually setting it up for the foundation for the rest of your team.
Yeah.
And you not only do you have a moral responsibility, I believe, but you will now have a fiscal and
legal responsibility
to do it. So,
and we spoke about, I think it was the last episode, it was the last episode that we're talking about the value of when you are in a coaching client relationship, service provider client relationship, to send out a bit of a survey or have a discussion every few months, making sure that everything's still running smoothly for both sides. Because you always want to know, as a coach, I always want to make sure that my client is still perceiving value and being satisfied, rather than one day them say, this isn't working, stop it. Like, there's been a few things grumbling, so just stop it now. So I would like to know. And so to be able to make sure that it's always a win-win, this is, comes with the premise that hopefully everyone does want a win-win, but it's not always the case. But you ask those questions every few months of your client to make sure everything's still hunky-dory. But to do the same with your staff members as well, that have those performance reviews but make them 360 degrees. So you are asking them the question as well, what's working great for you and what could be improved upon. Always having that environment where they can share what does need to be improved upon. With our recruitment pools getting so small over the last couple of years, I think in every industry, things are changing. And where in the past it's been, this is your employment contract. If you can commit to all of that sign down the bottom, I think they are going to become a bit more of a memorandum of understanding as well. That is going to be contribution from both sides, because the employees are going to be in a market where they're the ones choosing which company they choose to work for. So they're going to have a say in that contract. One of the big questions I think we always need to ask ourselves, because there are two people in the room, is, are my expectations reasonable? I mean, we're talking about contacting people at 9 o'clock at night. Is my expectation to only be contactable in standard business hours so I can get downtime, is that reasonable? Yes, it is. Is it reasonable that I say I want all communications to be through email only because I'm shy and I don't want to speak on the phone? Well, that's not reasonable. And so I think we've always got to do that quick check, and maybe asking somebody else is a good idea on some expectations that are outside the norm. That, is this a reasonable expectation to place on another person that they must comply to that to serve me? It's really one that just serves me. It doesn't serve the partnership, it serves me only.
And I think when you said that, you were talking about two people in the room. I actually think that there's a value to having a very broad conversation around acceptable and not acceptable. So from a team member perspective, having an open dialogue of, I'm thinking I want to set this as a boundary for how we work with each other. How does everyone feel about that? It then gets people to build greater trust with each other. I get an opportunity to say, I'm not happy with that. We can negotiate a point between what you want and what I want. So it actually is a great way of being a better leader. And from a business owner perspective, if this is a new thing for you, I think there's opportunity to bring other business owners or leaders together, people that you know in your network, and say, do you know what? I want to workshop some boundaries I want to set some new terms and conditions for my clients or for my staff, but I kind of just want to bounce off more than me in the room to see if it's acceptable or not. Then you do get the expectations or the experience of others, which can actually help to colour your view in a positive way. Because, for example, me saying, you know, after 7 p.m., unless it's an emergency, in fact, one of my boundaries is, it's not so much a boundary, but I generally don't coach past 6 p.m. And I say to people, if I'm setting an appointment at 4 p.m. for coaching, you need to know I'm not going to be at my best. So you can choose that appointment time, but I'm just going to let you know that you're not getting the best version of me, because I can talk, but I'm not going to make any sense, which is why the podcast hasn't been as great this year. But hearing, you know, people going, oh, hang on, what do you mean you're not going to have an appointment for a client at 4 p.m.? It's like, well, hang on, it's about my integrity of the service that I deliver, and I know I'm not at my best. I'm not able to think as strategically or sharply, you know, or I'm not able to think as strategically and sharply if I put wine in my cup.
Right. Right. Note to self, mumbled all through the presentation. Don't drink just prior to my presentation.
Prior to presentations.
New boundary for myself.
But what that can do is give you permission to actually set a boundary, because especially if this is all new to you, to hear someone say, no, I generally don't have client appointments after 4 p.m. It's like, I can do that? Yeah, you can do that. Of course you can.
And I think having that discussion with people who've been in your industry for many years longer and asking them, after all this time and all your experiences, what boundaries do you have in place? Jump in nice and early and get them in place. You don't have to go through the pains of the negative outcomes in order to bring you to that space.
Yeah. Julie, is it ever okay to go back on your boundaries?
Yes.
So
Let's go back on everything. We're human. We don't always get it right.
I think the answer to that is yes.
What do they call them? Unintended consequences. There's been unintended consequences here.
Well, I think it's acceptable, depending on if you've done all the work beforehand. You've got a good, trusted relationship that's been developed. Your person knows what is acceptable and what's not acceptable. When you go over your boundary, that person then knows that you're going out of your way because this is not the norm. And so, and also it's about the relationship. So the relationship.
She has been drinking.
See, this is why I don't have
the version. This is the version of it.
Yeah, exactly. Because my mouth stops working. You are a great example of this, Julie, because not very often, but I know I did it recently to you. I think it was like half an hour before the podcast recording, and I pinged you and I said, Julie, I am not in the right space. Can we postpone? And you're very gracious always with that. But I think because not that we ever sat down around an MOU with it, but we probably had our values aligned in that if we've got an appointment in the calendar, we're turning up and we turn up on time. We let each other know if we're going to be late and all that sort of stuff. So actually when there's I'm running late or I'm not feeling it or I'm going to have to move this because a client has turned up, there's agency to say totally fine. It's no big deal because I know this is outside of the norm.
Yeah. Nice. That's a good thing to have in our own minds too. Don't just stick to everything 100% just cause. Like have that flexibility that allows life to happen to other people, allows who knows when it's going to happen to you yourself, that you're the one that needs to break your own boundary, but it's it's needed to in that particular situation. There still is some of my core drivers that people free will. That people have the freedom to conduct their lives in any way that they choose, and also that going with the flow for whatever reason. It just wasn't meant to happen right now. So not to have them necessarily direct boundaries because they're kind of anti-boundaries, but to have your boundaries in place but still maintain the values that do drive your behavior if they are values that don't just serve you but serve the people around you as well. And I think, we always talk about values and we always end up in most conversations saying, see, this is why it's important to identify your values, because this is another good reason why. Because if you can check I said it before, are your boundaries realistic? Is that new boundary that you want to put in place, is that realistic? If you pass it through your value system, that will help guide that as well.
So also just looking, Julie, episode number 35 is the value of values.
Oh, we've also done free will. Which one was
We've done, hang on, let me, value of values. I don't know where the second value of values is. There's another one. Oh, no, it's up there. And free will is free will. Episode 10. Will you be like God and provide the gift of free will? Can you believe that was episode 10, Julie?
No, that was that. That seems very short time ago.
I know, right?
Yeah.
There you go.
There you go. Well,
I reckon we've done that. I reckon we've done boundaries, Julie.
I reckon we've done boundaries pretty damn well.
Would you like me to put
your tongue around it?
Would you like me to put a hula hoop around it?
Please. It's hula hoop ready. Go.
Well, Julie, today we talked about boundaries, and there's lots of really good reasons for us to put boundaries in place. It builds better relationships, it builds trust, it reduces frustrations, it allows others to know how to behave, which helps success. It helps us be more professional and responsive and reduces burnout. A boundary is a fence that stops cows from escaping. How to set boundaries is to look at the things that create the hot buttons in you or that create frustration. There's normally a violation happening, and that's a good place to start. How do you set a boundary? Well, there's lots of ways to do it, but it fundamentally comes down to communicating with another person that this is a boundary. And when I say another person, we've talked mostly in the context of your staff and clients as a business leader today. There is always an opportunity to bring it back if boundaries have been violated, and Julie did give us a beautiful, beautiful way of communicating that. I'm not even going to try because, Julie, I'm going to hire you just to have difficult conversations with people, Julie, from now at this point forward. And finally, you can go back on a boundary if you've set them well to start off with, because people have the agency to change the way that they interact with you and you with them. Did I miss anything out in my wrap?
I really do admire your summarising skills, Shannyn. That was 3 S's in a row.
Thank you. My pleasure to summarise. Put a hula hoop around it. Stick a bow on it.
Stick a bow. What is it? Stick a pin in me, I'm done? What is it? Stick a something in me? What are you sticking in me? Stick a fork in me. Stick a fork in me, I'm done. This podcast episode is done.
Done and dusted, legends.
Thanks, Shannyn. See you next time.
Thanks, Julie. Thanks, listeners. See you next time. Bye.
Ciao.